A court in Las Vegas, 4 ladies, a single man, and a secret that had been hidden in a drawer for 9 years. That morning, no one thought Meri Brown would show up with a folder in her hands. No one thought Robyn Brown, the wife who stayed with him and was supposed to be on his side, would get on the witness stand and look the court in the eye. When Kody Brown finally sat down to testify, no one, not even his own lawyer, thought he would say what he did. But here's the thing about the truth. You can put it off. You can change the order of it. You can sign papers that change the way it looks on the surface and tell yourself that this is the same as burying it. But when 4 women who used to share a husband, a home, and a dream decide to stop being quiet, the truth comes out. It walks into the courthouse wearing a light blue scarf and carrying a cream-colored folder. Then it sits down in the witness chair and talks. If you've ever trusted someone completely, and then found out that trust was being used against you in a quiet, careful way, stay right here. This story isn't just about a family on a reality show falling apart, plural marriage, or property fraud. It's about what happens when the people who love you the most finally decide that love is not a good enough reason to keep your secrets. Leave a comment now and tell us whose side you're on before this even starts. I promise you that your answer will change by the time this is over. Let's go back. Not yet. Not to the courtroom. To understand why 4 women are sitting in a Las Vegas courthouse right now, we need to go back to the beginning of this story. We need to see what the Brown family was like before the cameras, the lawyers, and the words that could never be taken back. The Brown family was, in every way, strange. Kody Brown had 4 wives: Meri, Janelle, Christine, and Robyn. They all had 17 kids together. They lived their lives in front of everyone, which is something that most plural families would never do. Kody Brown thought that their way of life was something the world needed to see. Something that's worth fighting for. Something to be happy about. And for years, that's what the world did. They looked. They talked about it. Some people were very scared. Some people were very interested. Some people were quietly moved by how complicated it was. The way these women loved each other's kids, dealt with jealousy, and tried to make something meaningful out of an arrangement that most people didn't get. But the cameras didn't always show this. There was a financial structure inside the Brown family that very few people fully understood. It was hidden behind the confessional interviews, family dinners, cross-country moves, and matching Christmas pajamas. And that structure, quiet, hidden, and buried in paperwork, is what brought everyone to this courtroom. Because the most secret betrayals are always the ones that are hidden in the fine print. Over the years, the Brown family had bought property, houses in Utah, land in Nevada, real estate that had both financial and emotional value, proof that this family had built something real and lasting. In her own way, each wife had understood that this property was shared. The sacrifices they had each made, the loneliness, the compromise, and the years of loving a man who was always being split up, meant that they all had a stake in what the family had built together. That was the plan. That was, as Christine would later say, the promise. And it was a promise that Kody Brown had broken on purpose and on a regular basis, according to the lawsuit that was filed on a cold Tuesday morning in February. The legal papers made the news like a thunderclap. Christine Brown and Janelle Brown, who both publicly broke up with Kody in late 2021 and early 2022, were accusing him of fraud, breaking a verbal contract, getting something for nothing. The legal language that sounds dry on paper but is actually very simple. We gave you everything, and you gave it all to her. Of course, her name is Robyn. Robyn Brown was Kody's 4th wife. She was the only one he had legally married and the only one who stayed with him after the others left. She had quietly become the only person to benefit from a family empire that all 4 women had built together. Christine and Janelle said that, though. Christine woke up in her new home in Utah, which was a beautiful, sunny place that didn't feel like the compound-style living she had left behind. For the first time in a long time, she felt something close to peace. Not yet happy, but the strong, grounded feeling of a woman who has finally chosen to stop being scared. Patricia Holt, Christine's lawyer, had told her, "They're going to try to make you look bitter. They're going to say this is about jealousy." Christine had just said, "Let them try." Christine Brown, the woman who once cried on TV about feeling like she was at the bottom of Kody's list of priorities, was done being small. On the other hand, Janelle was determined in a different way. Christine was hot and angry, but Janelle was cool and calm. She had always been the one who made sense of the numbers. It was Janelle who first saw the differences. A property tax notice, a small piece of paper that most people would look at and throw away. But Janelle didn't. She read it very carefully. What she found made her stomach drop. They bought the land in Nevada together, talked about it at family meetings, and showed it on their show. It was listed under one name, Robyn Brown. That same afternoon, Janelle called her lawyer. Kody Brown was already on the phone with his 30-year-old lawyer, Douglas Wren, who had gray hair. Douglas said, "Please tell me you have proof. Tell me that everything was made clear." There was a break on Kody's end. A beat too long. Kody said, "I'll tell you when I see you." Douglas stopped writing and looked up at the ceiling. That 1-2-second pause was the sound of everything that was about to fall apart. Before something important happens in a courtroom, there is a certain kind of silence that falls over the room. It's not a quiet silence. It's the silence of people holding their breath, leaning forward almost without realizing it, and staring at one spot in the room as if blinking might make them miss something that can't be undone. On the second day, Patricia Holt looked up at the gallery, straightened her jacket, and said the two words that sent a wave through Judge Okafor's courtroom like a stone dropped in perfectly still water. "Christine Brown." Christine got up slowly. She smoothed the front of her soft green blazer, which was chosen on purpose to look professional but warm. Then she walked to the witness stand at a measured pace, like a woman who has practiced this moment in her mind more times than she can count and is finally here. No more practice, just the real deal. She took a seat. She moved the microphone around, and she looked out at the courtroom with those big hazel eyes that millions of people had seen on TV for years. She looked different now. Not the Christine who had cried in confessionals or smiled through obvious pain for the camera. This Christine was in trouble, settled inside herself in a way that acting strong never quite seems to do. Patricia started with the basics. Name. How long the relationship lasted. The 25 years that they spent together in a plural marriage that was never legally recognized were as real as life gets in every way that mattered. Because a piece of paper can't make 25 years go away. It doesn't take away the children you raised, the home you built, or the promise someone made you when you were young enough to believe it without question. Patricia went through the early years step by step, talking about how the family was formed, how they shared money and property, and how they talked about money and property as a group. Christine made it clear. Everything that came in was shared. What they built was for everyone. For the kids. That was never in doubt. Patricia asked, "When did that change?" Christine's eyes moved to the defense table for a short time. Kody sat and watched her with a look that was carefully, purposefully neutral. She turned around and looked at Patricia. "When Robyn came into the picture," she said in a low voice. Douglas Wren was standing up. "Objection. Guesswork." Judge Okafor said, "I'll let it happen. The witness is talking about what she saw. Go on." Christine did do that. She talked about how things changed slowly, with decisions becoming less group-based and conversations between Kody and Robyn that were later shown to the other wives as already settled. She talked about asking Kody directly about a certain piece of property in Nevada about 3 years before their marriage ended. Patricia asked, "What did he say?" Christine's jaw got a little tighter. "He said it was taken care of. He said not to worry about it. He said he'd take care of the family." She stopped. Kody made you feel like asking questions about money was rude. Like you were being difficult instead of just trusting. And She stopped, took a deep breath. I believed in him. For a long time, I believed in him more than I believed in my own gut. That admission, soft, slow, and heartbreaking, is the sound of a woman finally letting herself be angry. There was a lot of silence in the courtroom. Patricia moved on and showed Christine property records, financial filings, and transfer documents. Christine confirmed each one piece by piece until the direct examination was over and the picture became uncomfortably clear. Christine thought that at least 4 properties were owned by a group, but they had been slowly and quietly moved into Robyn Brown's name. The transfers happened during times of family stress, like a move, a health scare, or a fight, when no one was paying close attention to the paperwork. Patricia asked, "Did you know these transfers were going on?" Christine said, "No, I didn't." Douglas Wren then got up to be cross-examined. Experienced, methodical, and good at breaking down a story without seeming to attack the person who told it. He doubted Christine's memory of talks they had years ago. He showed clips from the show that showed Christine being happy with the family's living situation. He said, "At the time, you seemed fine with everything, didn't you?" "I looked like a lot of things on camera," Christine said. That was sort of the point. A soft wave went through the gallery. It settled down on its own. Douglas pushed harder, pointing out that Christine had chosen to leave the marriage and was now claiming property that she had willingly given up. He said, "You chose to leave. Now you want what you left behind?" Christine's voice got sharper, not loudly or emotionally, but with the precision of someone who has been waiting for this question. "I left a marriage," she said. "I didn't leave behind 25 years of financial help." There it was. The line that everyone in the courtroom had been waiting for. The line that would be everywhere by nightfall. Douglas changed his mind about the lack of written proof. No formal contracts, no signed agreements, just verbal agreements between people who trusted each other. He said that without written proof, the court couldn't be sure that any promise was ever made. Christine stared at him for a long time. Then she said in a clear but quiet voice, "I expect you to call the next witness." Douglas blinked. "I'm sorry?" She said again, "The next witness." Her voice still calm and even. "Mr. Wren, there's a reason we have a list of witnesses, and there's a reason one of those names will shock everyone in this room." The gallery moved right away. Patricia was already getting up. Douglas was facing the judge. Judge Okafor called a 15-minute break, and her voice cut through the noise. Christine got up and walked back to the table where the plaintiff was sitting. "Good," Janelle said, leaning a little toward her. Kody had finally broken his silence at the defense table. He leaned toward Douglas Wren and spoke in a low, urgent voice. Douglas was listening with the look of a man who was quietly resetting everything. Christine had just told the court that there was a witness who would change everything. The defense team didn't know for sure who that was or what they were carrying. The woman in the pale blue scarf in the back corner hadn't moved. Meri Brown sat quietly with her cream-colored folder on her lap and her eyes fixed on the middle distance. She already knew who the next person to testify was, because she was the next witness. The break that was supposed to last 15 minutes turned into 25. When something unexpected happens, these things always do. Outside the courtroom, lawyers stood in tight groups and talked quickly and quietly. Court staff moved a little faster than usual. A door opened and closed somewhere deeper in the building with a finality that felt important, like small sounds do when everything is already tense. The room felt like a sky before a storm when Judge Okafor came back to the bench and the court started up again. Everything was too clear and still, and the air pressed against the skin in a way that felt wrong. "Ms. Holt," said Judge Okafor, "bring in your next witness. Patricia Holt got up. She looked back at the back of the courtroom once. Short. Planted out. The plaintiff calls Meri Brown. The silence that came after was not like any other silence that had come before it. This one had a texture, with layers of disbelief and something like awe pushing together at the same time. Because everyone in that room knew what it was. Everyone knew what it meant when Meri Brown got up from that back corner seat and walked toward the witness stand with a folder in her hand. Kody Brown stood still as a statue. Robyn, who was sitting in the gallery, put her hand flat against her sternum. It was a small, involuntary gesture, as if she was checking to see if her heart was still where it should be. Meri walked slowly and carefully, like someone who has made a choice and is now just following through with it. She wore simple clothes, dark pants, deep burgundy, and small earrings. Nothing too much. She looked like a woman who had chosen to take up just the right amount of space and was completely okay with it. She sat down, changed the microphone, put her hands together in her lap, and stared straight at Patricia Holt. It's amazing that someone who has been underestimated for years can finally sit down in a room full of people and refuse to be small anymore. Patricia started off slowly. First, let's talk about the basics. Meri's relationship with Kody, how long it lasted, and the legal issues that came up. Meri was Kody's only legal wife until 2014, when he divorced her so that he could legally adopt Robyn's children. A moment that had been filmed, talked about, and debated over and over again, and that Meri had said at the time was a sacrifice she was willing to make for the family. Patricia asked, "How did that feel?" "At that time," Meri said carefully. "At the time, I was told it was just a formality, that it didn't change anything real, that I was still his wife in the ways that mattered." "And did you really believe that?" Meri said, "I wanted to believe it." "There's a difference." Patricia nodded, as if this was exactly what she had expected to hear. After that, she moved. "Did you hear a conversation between you, Kody Brown, and the family's financial advisor about 9 years ago?" "Yes." "Can you tell me what was said?" Meri took a deep breath. "We were talking about buying property, specifically in Nevada. We talked about how to structure ownership for tax reasons and other reasons. Kody suggested a structure, but the financial advisor had concerns. Kody then made certain promises." "What kind of guarantees?" "He said, and I remember this very clearly, that any deal was only temporary. It was a financial strategy, not a permanent transfer of ownership. He also said that all 4 wives would keep equal interest in the family's assets, no matter whose name was on the paperwork." She stopped. "He said it was to keep the family safe. He said it more than once, both during and after the meeting." Douglas Wren now looked like a man who had just realized that the floor below him wasn't as solid as he thought it was. Patricia asked, "Was there any written proof of those promises?" Meri said, "He didn't think so." The exact light weight of those 3 words, "didn't think so," sent a new wave through the whole room. Patricia said softly, "Meri, do you have something to say to this court?" Meri looked at the folder she was holding. She had been holding this small, cream-colored folder that had been in a drawer in her home for 9 years since she sat down. Through the scandal of catfishing. Through a marriage that had turned into a show of a marriage. She moved across the country and had a dozen chances to use it differently, but chose not to each time. She opened it up. There were 2 pieces of paper inside, written by hand. The handwriting was big and different. It looked like the work of someone who had been told their penmanship was great and really believed it. Meri said, "Kody wrote me a letter after that meeting. He did this sometimes. Wrote letters instead of talking to people he didn't want to talk to. This one was about the money arrangements and what he was promising." She looked up. "He wrote it himself, signed it, and told me to throw it away after I read it." It was so quiet in the room that the air conditioning could be heard. "And did you?" Patricia asked. "Get rid of it?" Mary's eyes moved slowly and carefully across the courtroom. Christine was looking at her with a look that was open, shocked, and thankful all at the same time. To Janelle, whose stillness had turned into something that looked almost like relief. And then, for just 1 second, to Robyn. What happened between those two women in that short amount of time was something that no camera could have caught. After that, Meri turned to Patricia again. "No," she said without any more words. "I didn't." She gave him the folder. The clerk of the court stepped up, and at that moment, 9 years of silence came to an end. Douglas Wren objected to the document being used as evidence. Within 15 minutes, a handwriting expert already hired by the plaintiff's team confirmed that the writing matched Kody Brown's known samples. Patricia read parts out loud. The language was casual and personal. This was meant to be a private message, not a legal document. But there were clear statements hidden in the personal reasons. Promises that are clear. The phrase "belongs to all of us" was used 3 times. The phrase "Robyn's name is just a practical matter" came up once. And at the bottom, in handwriting that got a little shaky, as if the person writing it was feeling something when they got to that line: "I would never let any of you lose what we've built together. That's not who I am." In that courtroom, those words, "That's not who I am," had the weight of a promise that was directly measured against the evidence that it had been broken. As soon as Patricia started reading, Robyn stopped looking at the letter. She stared at a fixed point on the wall, and her face was calm, but you could tell she was trying hard to keep it that way. Her hands were still in her lap. Kody Brown had his head down a little. Douglas Wren was writing like crazy. Meri sat quietly on the stand, her folder empty and her hands resting open on her thighs. In some way, she seemed lighter. It was like something heavy had finally been put down, something that had been carried for a long time and alone. Douglas Wren's cross-examination questioned the context, the motivation, and the legal weight of personal letters. He asked if Meri might be acting out of her own problems. He asked, "Do you have personal feelings about how your marriage ended?" "Yes," Meri said. "But I'm not here to talk about my feelings. I'm here for a piece of paper." Douglas Wren didn't have an answer right away. When Meri finally left the stage and went back to her corner seat, the room let out a sigh of relief. She sat down, smoothed out the leg of her pants, and put her hands in her lap. She didn't even look at Kody. She didn't pay attention to Robyn. She turned to Christine. And Christine, calm, strong Christine, who had held herself together with amazing grace all morning, pressed her lips together and blinked hard. 1 time. That day, it was the closest either of them came to crying. But the day wasn't over yet. Because Kody Brown's team had already asked for a settlement talk by the time court broke for lunch, the question was whether Christine and Janelle were willing to talk. Before the end of the afternoon, Patricia Holt delivered Janelle's answer, which was 4 words. "We'll see them tomorrow." It's common for people in civil cases to talk about settlements. In theory, they are also private. Attorneys and their clients should be able to talk freely in those rooms, which is a safe space where they can say things that aren't allowed in the official court record, where people can talk about their feelings and numbers can be thrown around, and where the difference between what people want and what they'll accept is quietly and carefully worked out. In theory. The day after Meri's testimony, the lawyers met in a conference room on the 4th floor of the courthouse. 2 long tables had been put together. The glasses of water were already out. The room smelled like fresh coffee and old carpet, and there was a certain tension in the air that comes from people who are about to negotiate something that can't be changed once it starts. Patricia Holt was the first to arrive, and Christine and Janelle sat next to her. Christine's body language was open, and her hands were lightly folded on the table in front of her. Janelle's was always organized. She already had her notepad and pen out because Janelle Brown never went anywhere without a way to take notes. People had known her that way for as long as they could remember. Kody used to like that about her, but later, it seems, he didn't like it. 2 people from Douglas Wren's team came with him. Kody wasn't there. His absence spoke volumes. It didn't matter if he had chosen not to go or had been told not to go. The result was the same. He had sent people to negotiate the results of his own decisions without being there to see the faces of the women those decisions had affected. In a way, it fit perfectly with everything Christine and Janelle said on the stand. Some people spend their whole lives looking for ways to be the author of a story without ever having to be in the room where it ends. Douglas started with numbers. There was a financial figure on the table, like a card turned face up. Patricia took a look at it. Put something down in her notebook. Put it face down. Then he looked at Douglas Wren and said, "Tell me what else you have." For the next 2 hours, we talked in a way that doesn't show up in transcripts. Each side was careful, probing, and methodical, testing the limits of what the other side was willing to accept and listening for what the other side wasn't saying. Douglas contended that Meri's letter, though emotionally persuasive, was legally ambiguous and would not withstand a comprehensive evidentiary challenge. Patricia responded with a list of more witnesses who had not yet been called and a second set of financial documents that had not yet been used as evidence. At one point, Christine spoke directly, which Patricia had warned her about, but Christine had never been able to resist when silence felt like agreeing. She looked across the table and said clearly and quietly, "I don't want Kody's money. I want what was ours. I want the record to show the truth." For a moment, Douglas Wren looked at her. Then he said almost softly, "Ms. Brown, those might not be the same thing." "Then make them the same," Christine said. The talk ended without a solution. Both sides agreed to meet again. The offer was face down on the table while both teams went back to their clients. That should have been the end of the day's excitement. No, it wasn't. By 6 that night, information from the settlement talk had gotten out. Not a recording or a transcript, but enough. A reporter waiting outside the courthouse could put together the big picture with this information. A major entertainment news site ran a story with the headline, "Brown Family Settlement Talks Collapse. Christine Won't Take the Money." Within an hour, it had spread. Robyn Brown read it on her phone in a house across town and made a choice that would change everything about this trial. People who knew Robyn said she had been unusually quiet for the past 24 hours. Not the Robyn that viewers knew, who was quick to cry and honest about her feelings in ways that made people feel sorry for her and angry at her. This was a different kind of silence. The kind that happens when something inside has changed so much that the outside hasn't caught up yet. Because Meri's letter had opened something up inside her. Not because of what it showed the court, but because of what it showed Robyn herself. Things she had felt for years in the pauses between conversations. In paperwork that she was told about in general terms, but never in detail. In choices made in her name that she didn't fully understand or agree with. She had told herself that it was hard. She had told herself that Kody was in charge of the family's affairs. She had built a series of reasonable stories and lived in them. This was because sometimes the other option, sitting with the truth you haven't named yet, is just too heavy to hold while you're also trying to raise kids, keep the house clean, and be the wife who stayed when everyone else left. But the letter made it impossible to ignore the unnamed thing. Robyn answered her phone. She called her own lawyer, not Kody's. She had hired him 3 weeks earlier without telling Kody, which seemed like too much at the time but now seemed like the most important thing she had done in years. "I want to give evidence," she said. Her lawyer didn't say anything. "Robyn, that's..." Again she said, "I want to testify. Not for them, not for him, for me. I want to tell the truth about what I knew, when I knew it, and what I didn't know. I don't want anyone else to decide what version of me this court sees." There is a big difference between being caught and choosing to speak. And Robyn Brown didn't want to get caught. The next morning, Judge Okafor noticed that something was different about the courtroom. Robyn's gallery seat was empty. For the first 3 days, it was quiet and full of people watching. Patricia Holt saw it right away. She leaned toward her co-worker, who was looking at his phone. He leaned back with an expression that made Patricia change her mind a little bit. Not a lot, and not in a way that most people in the room could see, but enough. Douglas Wren saw it too. He stared at the empty chair. Then he looked at his phone. Then he slowly and carefully put his phone face down on the table, as if he had just gotten news he didn't want to hear. Judge Okafor looked at the two teams. "Are we ready to go?" Douglas stood up. "Your Honor, the defense asks for a short delay. We have learned new information." "Mr. Wren." Judge Okafor's voice was not harsh, but it was clear. 4 days in session. I let your settlement recess yesterday. I will give you 20 minutes. After that, we will continue. During those 20 minutes, Kody Brown's lawyers had the most dreaded conversation in their field. Not because the facts are hard to understand, but because the choices are suddenly and permanently limited. Robyn Brown had contacted the plaintiff's lawyer overnight, without warning or talking to Kody, and offered to testify on her own. A complete account of everything she knew, everything she had been told, and everything she had figured out on her own. She was not going to be part of the lawsuit. She wasn't changing sides. In the most accurate legal and human sense of the word, she was just telling the truth. And when the truth finally decides to speak after years of careful silence, it never does so quietly. Douglas Wren looked like he had aged a little in 20 minutes when court started again. Kody Brown was still next to him, but this time it felt different. It had looked like calmness before. It now looked like shock was wearing composure as a costume. Patricia got up. "Your Honor, another witness has asked to give voluntary testimony for the sake of context and clarity. Robyn Brown would like to speak to this court." The gallery moved with a reaction that was barely contained. Judge Okafor raised his hand. The room got quiet. Kody Brown moved his head. He turned and looked right at the door that Robyn was about to walk through for the first time in 4 days. The door opened too, and everything that came after, every word, every revelation, every truth that had been waiting years to be heard, came with her. It takes a lot of courage to tell people the truth when they have every reason to dislike you. Not because you have to by law. Not because you got caught and have no other choice. But because something inside you has quietly, finally, decided that you are no longer willing to live in a version of events that isn't real. Robyn Brown sat down in the witness chair, smoothed the front of her gray dress, and looked out at a courtroom full of people who had watched her on TV for years and made up their minds about her that she had long since stopped trying to change. She wasn't here to fix them today either. She was here for a reason that was more important than her reputation. Patricia Holt came up to her with careful gentleness, like a skilled lawyer who knows that the witness in front of her is weak in a certain way and needs to be led, not pushed. She started with the basics. History, the Brown family's entrance, the marriage to Kody that was legal in 2010. Meri had to legally divorce Kody before she could adopt, and this was a series of events that had been filmed, talked about, and analyzed in public for years. In this courtroom, it had a weight that it had never quite had on TV. Robyn gave a clear answer. She had always been able to speak clearly, choosing her words carefully and using the right words. Today, though, that skill was being used for something other than what it usually was. It wasn't protecting anyone today. Today, it was just telling the truth in the way it needed to be told. Because the most dangerous thing a cautious person can do is stop being careful for all the wrong reasons and start being honest for all the right ones. "Robyn," Patricia said as she moved closer, "when did you first find out that properties were being put in your name?" "Slowly," Robyn said. Kody would mention things in passing, like that a certain filing had been updated or that there were logistical reasons for how things were set up. He had a way of making financial decisions seem like administrative details instead of choices. It was as if they were just being taken care of and I didn't need to look too closely at them. Did you ask about it? Robyn's jaw got a little tighter. I asked questions. I didn't always like the answers. But Kody is... She paused, carefully choosing her words. Very convincing. When he explains something, he makes it seem like questioning it is unnecessary or disloyal. And everyone in that gallery who had ever let someone they loved talk them out of a reasonable doubt knew exactly what Robyn Brown meant. Patricia moved slowly and carefully. Did you ever have a specific moment when you realized how much had been put in your name? Yes, Robyn said. About 18 months ago. My personal lawyer, not the family's lawyer, was looking over some papers for a different case. She asked me a direct question about some properties. A simple, straightforward question. And I couldn't answer it. Her voice stayed steady, but her eyes seemed to go somewhere else, back to that moment. I didn't know enough about my own money situation to answer a simple question about it. That's when I began to ask different questions and get different answers. What did you discover? I realized that I owned things I hadn't consciously chosen to own. I learned that decisions had been made about assets and transfers in my name that I hadn't fully authorized or understood. And I found... She stopped. Take a breath. Then it went on. The picture I had been given of our family's finances was very different from what the documents showed. Douglas Wren didn't move at all at the defense table. He wasn't saying anything. He was listening with the focused attention of someone who was carefully writing down everything that happened next. Patricia moved. Robyn, I want to talk to you about a certain conversation. It was a private one that happened about 6 months before Christine broke up with Kody. Do you know what I'm talking about? Robyn took a quick look at her hands. Then they looked up. Yes, she said. I know what you're talking about. And that answer held the story that no one in the courtroom had heard before. The talk that not only explained the property transfers, but also when they would happen. It was a Wednesday night. The kids were asleep. The house was quiet in a way that only happened late at night when the busyness of a big family had finally stopped. Kody had been thinking about things. He was in one of those moods where his usual performance of confidence turned into something more open and honest. He had been talking about what would happen next, about how the family would look in the future. And then he said it plainly, with the bluntness that sometimes came out of him when he wasn't being careful. I don't think Christine will stay. Robyn had been shocked, not completely surprised. She had felt the tension and seen how Christine's connection to the family was slowly fading. But hearing Kody say it so directly had shaken something up. What do you mean? She had said. Kody had said, she's not happy. And when she leaves, things will have to be set up differently, more neatly. I want to make sure our family is safe. Robyn had said the phrase back to him slowly. Our family. And Kody had looked at her, and she had seen something in his eyes that she didn't want to name. For the first time, she was saying something out loud in this courtroom. He meant me and him, Robyn said softly. And our kids. That's who he meant. Not all 4 wives. Not 17 kids. He was already thinking about a version of this family that didn't include everyone 6 months before Christine left. Those words sank into the floor of the courtroom like dirt. They didn't bounce back. They didn't repeat. They just stayed put. Christine, who was sitting at the plaintiff's table, had become very still. Her face was calm, but her eyes were going through something complicated. It wasn't exactly grief or anger, but the feeling of having something you already suspected confirmed in public, out loud, by the last person you thought would do it. Janelle wrote something down in her notebook. Then they drew a line under it. 2 times. Kody Brown's head was slightly bowed, and he was pressing both hands flat against the defense table, as if he needed something solid to hold him up. Patricia went on with care. Based on the papers you looked over and the talks you've had, what do you think is the reason for these property transfers? Robyn picked each word with care. I think Kody made decisions about the family's money based on who he thought would stay and who he thought would leave. He did this without telling anyone, including me, what he was doing or why. A pause. I don't know if that's fraud. I'm not a lawyer, but I do know it wasn't honest. It wasn't honest is not the same as fraud in the eyes of the law. But in a family that had built itself in public on love, honesty, and shared commitment, those 4 words were a decision that only they could make. Douglas Wren's cross-examination was tougher than anything he had said to the witnesses before. He questioned the circumstances of the Wednesday conversation, wondered if her interpretation was being skewed by hindsight, and kept bringing up the fact that she hadn't been at most of the financial meetings. Then he asked the question straight out. Are you mad at Kody Brown? The room leaned in. Robyn let the silence last for 1 full beat. Then there were 2. Yes, she said. I'm mad, but that doesn't mean what I said isn't true. Sometimes the best thing someone can say is, I'm angry, and I'm still right. Robyn walked past the defense table when she finally stepped down. She didn't pay attention to Douglas Wren. She didn't look at the papers that were all over the table or the junior lawyers who were stuck in their seats. But she stopped right next to Kody Brown for just a second, less than a full breath. Not a word. Not either of them. After that, she kept going. And in that silence between 2 people who had loved each other, built a life together, and were now on opposite sides of something that couldn't be fixed, everything was there. The Brown family was everything they had been and weren't anymore. Everything that 4 women had given to one man's idea of himself. The door shut behind her, and everyone in that courtroom knew, without being told, that the real reckoning had already happened, no matter what happened next. A verdict, a settlement, or an appeal.